Welcome to the MB Press interview series for the Legends of a Werewolf Hunter anthology. I'm Miles Booth, and today we have Rob Pegler, and he's an author that you might recognize from the MB Press roster. He's the author of Coppertown Red, so another bit of werewolf royalty here. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So, as we've talked to several of the other authors, we talked to Tom about his werewolf books, and he has a couple of different depictions of that. And we've talked a lot about Brian's books, and of course, everything in the book is based on what Brian has created with the autobiography of a werewolf hunter, followed up by Heart of Scars, The Lineage, and the Winter Fox Journals. And he's working on the sequel to the Winter Fox Journals right now. So all the stories are based on that world. And you have, how long has Coppertown Red been out? It's been a little while.
I think it was originally about 2014, so it has been a while.
Right, that sounds about right.
2014, 2015.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Coppertown Red for the viewers that are not familiar with it.
So basically, Coppertown Red, it's kind of I don't really think of it as a horror story. It has horror elements. It's kind of a mystery, sort of a crime story. So it's set in a small town, and there's a small kind of a werewolf population sort of living on the outskirts. And the town, they've sort of always been there since the beginning, and the town kind of knows that they're there, but most people are they tend to keep to themselves and blend in, and people don't really. It's sort of like the town's worst kept secret that there are werewolves living nearby. And the local police, they know, they don't officially know that they're there, but there's a few cops in town who just kind of, almost in their spare time, kind of keep an eye on things. And then that all kind of gets blown out of the water. There's a werewolf attack on the local radio station right in the middle of the broadcast. So basically the entire town is listening into the morning radio show, and they hear the DJ and the crew being wiped out by a werewolf. And then some of the locals they're not really werewolf hunters, but they have a connection to that kind of world. And they start trying to figure out why that happened and where that werewolf came from and what it all means. And then it kind of ties into things the werewolves have been doing in town that nobody really knows about. And it kind of goes from there. And it's also about a guy who, the main character is a werewolf hunter who was a resident of the town when he was younger, and then he moved away, and now he's sort of come back to help them figure out what's going on. So it's kind of like the local boy coming back to the small. And it's kind of a murder mystery crime story, but with werewolves.
Okay. I'm going to throw thriller in on that description because it's
okay.
You build the tension up throughout really well, and you have an incredible sense of pacing. So it starts off, and you've got the werewolf attack on the radio station, but then as they go through solving all the pieces of the puzzle and putting things together, you also have another element to it where there's more and more people that are getting hold of the namesake of the book, and there's more werewolves coming all the time, and then there's a big plot behind why that attack took place, a new werewolf in town, and a big plan that these folks have. So it's like I said, it's paced really well, and I'm going to have to throw thriller in there. It's good. So, and then you ended on a very cool note, I have to say.
Yeah, it sort of snowballs. It starts off quite small, and then it just sort of builds, and you find out what's going on, and then it gets a lot more action oriented towards the end.
Definitely, yeah. So there's action throughout, definitely. These wolves are kind of unique in a lot of ways, and I'll go ahead and tell the readers, because I think it's just an interesting point. The Coppertown Red is named after a drug that's produced by the werewolves. And
it's diluted. Basically, it's kind of a drug that's made out of diluted werewolf blood. and there's some werewolves who, because they have to live in the human world, and the werewolves, they kind of, some of them, they live completely apart from humans and they stay out in the woods, and then some of them live a bit closer to the human world and they kind of have to survive in our world. So one way that they do that is some of them basically siphon off their blood and use it to make this drug, which acts as a stimulant for humans. And the original name for the drug is Red Rose, which came out of a Meatloaf song on a hot summer night.
Which song?
Yeah, on a hot summer night, would you offer your throat to the wolf with the red roses? And I kind of got that and became Red Rose.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then Coppertown Red is just like the local variant, which becomes a point in the story that there's a difference with this particular variant of the drug.
Yeah.
And it causes a lot of problems. So, yeah.
A lot of problems.
Quite a few. Quite a few. Several deaths involved. Yeah.
Exactly. So, what was the inspiration behind bringing the drug use into it? And you've got, your classic werewolves out in the wilderness idea, but then, like you said, you bring in kind of this suburban element to it, and it's done in a way that I can't think of anyone else that does quite that version.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration there?
I guess I kind of try to think of like your supernatural elements, like ghosts, vampires, werewolves, and that, and sort of how they fit into an ordinary world. Yeah, I just started thinking about if there was if there were werewolves around and they were living in packs and whatever, how would that look? How would they fit in? So I have the different types of werewolves. So I have like the ones that are born werewolves. They're almost like a separate species, and then there are humans who've been bitten by werewolves, and they're like kind of a lesser, kind of a half breed between the two. And it's just how those, depending on what type of werewolf you are, how you would fit into like the mundane world. So like the purebred werewolves, who are the born ones, they're like a separate thing. They can't really relate to humans at all. So a lot of them just stay completely separate, and the ones that don't, they're kind of, it's almost like they're mimicking humans. They sort of try to blend in, but it's kind of like aliens trying to kind of blend in with humans. So, yeah. And yeah, it's just thinking about if you were a monster living in a human world, how would you fit in? Which kind of, I mean, the first story I had published, if you recall, was Till the Sun Is in the Sky and the Trigger Reflex. And yeah, that was about a girl who she gets bitten by a vampire and she becomes a vampire, and then she just tries to go on living an ordinary life, but suddenly she has a nocturnal lifestyle, can't really pursue anything that would involve going out during the day. So it's like, how would you deal with it, and how would you sort of just try to fit in and stay under the radar? And then I sort of expanded on that idea in this book with the mongrels, who were the humans who were turned. How would they get along now that they're different?
It's a very cool treatment of the subject. And again, I'm trying to think in all of the werewolf fiction, the only time that you see authors try to work werewolves into everyday life, that's more of the romance novels, or even like the kids books that kind of try to deal with it, but they're not dealing with any of the reality to it. It's not realistic at all. It's certainly not.
Yeah.
It's all, whatever they're trying to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be as practical as possible and just think about what, like when we first meet one of the characters, who is Missy, she's one of I call them the mongrels, who are the humans who become werewolves, and now they kind of have to live a little differently. The first time we meet her, she's in a supermarket and she's buying food.
Right.
And it's a small town, so everybody kind of knows who she is. So you kind of get the reactions of people as she's going around the supermarket. And then, they live in a little camp out in the woods. So what would you need to buy to survive if you were living permanently camped out in the woods in a little commune? So I was sort of trying to come up with a shopping list of what she'd need. And so it's just trying to think of those kind of practical considerations of how would I survive if I had to live in that world. Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes for a really compelling scenario, actually, because so very few people try to do this with any sort of monster fiction. and then you let all hell break loose, and then it gets really, really interesting and really, really fun. What would you say your other influences were on this particular book? What drove you to divide up the types of werewolves and want to highlight, the difference between a Mongol and a pureblood werewolf?
I mean, I used to have it's kind of the web series that I wrote. It's actually a character who shows up in the second book called Gabriel Pope, who's a professional, if you can be a professional, werewolf hunter. And I wrote a whole series of stories about him, and he was more of a vampire hunter than a werewolf hunter, but he dealt with werewolves occasionally. So a lot of it just kind of came out of there. It was just it's set in that same world. It's just trying to explore kind of what the rules are with werewolves, but I try to think of it like if werewolves existed, there probably wouldn't just be one type of werewolf that all behave the same way.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't just be one type of vampire or one type of zombie, because, it would be almost like there'd be like an ecosystem of different types and different environments, and they have different rules.
Yep.
And how they all relate to each other. Yeah, the whole idea of the werewolf, the drug of Red Rose, just kind of came out of one of the stories I wrote there. I just it just kind of became the hook for one of those stories. Yeah, and then I just expanded on that.
All right, so we've read Coppertown Red, and you have a sequel to that.
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that you feel like is getting ready? You want to release soon? Are you still working on it, or?
At the moment, I'm looking at re-releasing Coppertown Red as like a new version of it, and then the sequel is The Species Problem, and that mostly deals with. It carries on because it kind of goes out beyond the town and into the wider world, because the antagonist who causes all the issues in Coppertown, he goes out, he kind of leaves town and goes off to continue his business elsewhere. So some of the characters follow him, but then some of it stays in the town, and it's okay, we've had this big werewolf attack, a whole lot of people have been bitten, we've got a lot of people who are now infected with this, I guess, disease, and we don't really know what it is or how to deal with it or how to deal with these people, because when the full moon comes around, we've got a whole lot of people in town who are going to be a problem, and it's how they cope with that as a town. They keep everybody safe, and how they deal with it in terms of kind of keeping it all under wraps, because it's still kind of a crazy story that, hey, our town's full of werewolves. They kind of want to. They don't really want to advertise that.
It's not all over the globe. It's not accepted. It's not, a known.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's sort of one of the ideas that I'm sort of following through there, is how well known is it that these things exist,
right?
And does the government know? And what are they doing about it? Are they keeping it under wraps? There's some speculation that there might be people behind the scenes who are kind of pulling strings to keep it under wraps. Kind of the people are like, well, we thought this would be a bigger thing, that this has happened, but the reporters aren't showing up. So who's pulling strings on our behalf to keep this a secret? So it's one of the things that comes out of it. Yeah, we are at the moment looking at doing a re-release of Coppertown Red, and then do The Species Problem shortly after that, and then there'll be a third one, because it's a trilogy.
How far are you along with the third book?
Yeah.
How far along are you with
that? Just about. I don't think we've got a release date sorted out, but it's just about ready to go. We're getting there. Yeah.
Cool, very good. Looking forward to that one. Definitely. So, tell me about your influences in general. What scared the hell out of you as a little kid? Warped your mind? Made you want to?
Oh, so many things. I was not a horror fan as a kid. I was I couldn't watch horror movies. I was just one of those kids who just didn't want to deal with that. I mean, yeah, I wasn't the horror fan. I was scared to watch horror movies. My sister loved them, and she would stay up late at night and watch, The Exorcist and The Howling, and all of that, and I couldn't do it. So I actually had memory, because at one point we were on our summer vacation, and so we were at a little kind of cottage, beach sort of cottage, where my bedroom was right next to the living room. So my sister's in there at about 11 o'clock at night watching The Howling with the volume turned up, and I was in the bedroom just head under the covers kind of
Trying
thing.
to sleep.
Yeah,
Being able to.
yeah. So I actually have a lot of the dialogue, already had a lot of the dialogue from that movie in my head before I'd ever seen it, just from hearing it through the door. Yeah. But then that kind of flipped later on in the sort of teenage years, and now I'm the horror fan, and my sister can't stand horror movies. So
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not quite sure what happened there, but yeah.
What happened? When did you start liking horror movies?
I'm not sure. I think I started watching more and more of them as a teenager, and I think probably as I got older, I just sort of understood them better, and I started thinking more about just how cool werewolves are. Really, they are a very cool monster. Yeah, I think probably early influences. I mean, American Werewolf in London. And that sort of goes back to the thing about werewolves fitting into the real world, because I kind of like how that movie had quite a realistic take on werewolves, or it approached it in a really, it was a comedy and it was a horror movie, but it approached it in quite a realistic way. Like when they're out on the moors and Jack and David are walking across the moor, and they hear this thing out in the dark, and they realize they're being stalked by by some kind of creature. They sort of, the way they deal with it, I think it seems really true to life. They're like, well, what the hell is that? Which way do we go? And then okay, we'll go this way, and they're just kind of walking away, and they're cracking jokes. They're singing, they're doing all of these things to sort of try to keep themselves calm. They're not sure whether to take it seriously or not. They keep hearing it, but it's like, oh, what is that? And then they're walking in the other direction, and they're cracking jokes about Heathcliff and the Hound of the Baskervilles and stuff. So it seemed like quite a sort of a believable way of that's probably how you behave in that situation. I mean, you get to the big transformation scene. The thing I love about that, everybody talks about the special effects, and of course they're awesome. But the thing that always gets me about that, when the big transformation scene, is he's in a living room in the suburbs, lights on, it doesn't happen in darkness, they don't hide anything, and it's just completely ordinary surroundings, completely ordinary situation. He's sitting there reading a book, and then the full moon comes out, and he's rolling around on the floor, turning into a werewolf. But everything, the song's still playing on the stereo, and everything around him is normal, and just crazy things happening. Yeah. So it's sort of it just seems very grounded in the real world, and kind of it makes it believable. It actually makes it kind of scarier.
It does.
That it just seems so ordinary, and then suddenly he's turning into a werewolf, but everything around him is still. It's a nice, cozy living room. He's not out on a moor. He's not in a castle somewhere. He's just like
Yeah, it's where everybody is right now. And what happens if a werewolf starts to transform in your living room?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, it had a great effect. Obviously, it made a big impression. Very,
yeah.
Very
quite a big one. Yeah. So there was that, and I mean that The Howling was kind of the same thing. I like the approach they took with that. That it's what is it? It's like a retreat. There's a psychiatrist he's running a retreat for kind of a new age. They take new age spiritual retreat or whatever it is, but it's secretly a werewolf on you.
Yeah, they reverse the formula. So instead of coming off of the moors into town, they start off in town, and then they wind up out in the woods. So exactly. Yeah, they played a lot more of the tropes there, a lot more of the classic stuff. But even still, that classic transformation scene was in an office. So that was a similar treatment to an everyday environment that you're used to, and it kind of had not the same effect by any means, but I think a similar amount of dread of they brought it one step closer to everyday life. So I totally agree with you on that. That absolutely, they both achieved
the bookshop where they go to the bookshop and they're researching the werewolf, and there's the bookshop owner, and he's just standing there.
Yeah.
Okay, you need silver bullets, or you cut off an arm, you cut off a leg, and he's giving them just this very matter of fact. It's like he's explaining how to fix a dishwasher,
Yeah.
He's telling you how to kill werewolves, and then they're like, "What, do you believe in this stuff?" And he's like, "Well, shut up! I'm trying to make a buck." You know, he doesn't really believe it. So yeah, but it's just that they're a completely ordinary setting, and they're talking about all this crazy werewolf shit. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That classic bookstore owner.
Mm. What do I look like? An idiot? I'm trying to make a buck.
Exactly.
You want books? I got books.
So what, any other films or books or anything like that make a huge mark on you?
I was always, I don't know, even though I was kind of scared, I had friends who were very much into horror. I had a friend when I was a kid who was obsessed with werewolves. So some of it probably came from that. I do remember one of my first things I read was, it was a story called The Vampire of Crogland Grange, which was a vampire story, and it's one of those stories that's supposedly based on a true story. It's like an urban legend, but then a lot of people picked it up. And it has some similarities to Dracula. It's like there's two brothers, sort of Victorian era, two brothers and a sister, and they go out to a country house to spend the summer, and then the sister gets attacked by a werewolf, by a vampire, and then so they take her off to Switzerland or something to recover because she's got a fever and she's very, very ill from this vampire attack. And then they come back the following year and they set a trap to try to lure the vampire in so they can kill it. And then it turns out it was like a former owner of the house who's come back as a vampire, and he's in the there's like a mausoleum on the other side of the grounds.
Gotcha.
So it's a very very kind of gothic werewolf story. I just remember there's this one scene that appears in pretty much all the versions of the story that I've seen, where the sister is in bed and she's looking out the window out onto the lawn, and she sees these two little lights out in the darkness moving around, and she assumes it's people walking around with lanterns. Mm-hmm. And then it gets closer and closer to the window, and she realizes it's a pair of eyes, and there's a vampire stalking across the lawn towards the window. And that's her first indication of what's happening. And I read that story when I was like 9 or 10. And for years afterwards, I couldn't sleep sleep in front of an open window.
Yeah.
It's just that image of the eyes coming across the lawn.
Some part of the child's mind is like, that's bad. Don't get near the window.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, that image kind of stuck with me. So that was one of the things that really scared me as a kid. So yeah.
Now you include vampires in your stories. So the sequel, The Species Problem, that has some vampire action in it.
Yeah, because the Gabriel Pope stories mostly dealt with vampires, and that was the vampires kind of operated like there were clans of vampires who kind of operated like crime syndicates or crime families. It's kind of like the Godfather with the 5 families.
Yep.
All keeping an eye on each other in their territory. So when I decided that I was going to bring those two stories together, because Gabriel Pope becomes a major character in The Species Problem, it was how that all fitted together. So I think the idea is there's this one city which is pretty much unofficially run by the vampires, or they run the underworld of that city. There was at some point in their history, there was, and this is sort of part of the history of the story, that there was an incursion where some werewolves banded together and tried to sort of muscle in on the vampire's territory, and that created a lot of bad blood. And so I've got the vampires who they live kind of like wealthy crime lords, and then the werewolves are more like street gangs who live out in the wilderness. So you kind of almost get that sort of class system with the monsters, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
And then because most of these interviews we've talked about werewolves, hit me with your favorite vampire movies.
Near Dark is a big one. Yeah, I used to say that was my favorite vampire movie. I guess I could still say that. It might be challenged by some others now. Yeah, but I mean that's the same sort of thing, because it just took the idea of vampires and just turned it into a group of vampires traveling around in a mobile home, just going from town to town. They're not fancy, they're not sophisticated, they're a bunch of they're just basically white trash vampires, and they just go around, just going to bars, and they go to a bar and wipe everybody out and jump back in the motorhome and move on to the next one. So yeah, that just kind of the more sort of down and dirty sort of idea of vampires. Yeah, kind of that. I mean, that and the Lost Boys were sort of the classics when I was a kid, and they came out at more or less the same time, and they have, when you look at them, they have quite similar plots. So like Near Dark isn't that well known, and I think it's mostly because the Lost Boys came out at the same time, and everybody.
Did the Lost Boys come out first, and then?
They were the same year. I'm not sure which one came out first, but it was just overshot. The Lost Boys it was a cooler movie, and it had bigger names in it, I guess. So
yeah, I think
it was more of a teen movie as well. So yeah, but it got a little overshadowed.
Different things that kind of have withstood the test of time. So
yeah, I mean, what I liked about Near Dark was just the amount of background detail that went into it. Like Lance Henriksen, apparently, he pretty much lived in character. He created a whole backstory for his character that the director and the writer hadn't come up with. He just apparently sat down with the director and said, "Hey, I've got a backstory for my character. Do you want to hear it?" And they just sat down and had to talk about it. And she was like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." And so they just worked all that into the story. And yeah, apparently he and Bill Paxton, they were driving down to wherever they were filming, and he was already in costume. He had like the long jagged nails, and he had the scar and the trench coat and everything. And they got pulled over by a cop. And, he was just completely in character, and he was giving him the Jesse Hooker stare out the window, and it was. I think I don't remember if he told that story or Bill Paxton did, but it was just like this cop was looking very nervous and kind of backing away, and is this going to turn into a situation? And because he just lived in that character, and yeah, I like the way that all the vampires, they all became vampires at a different sort of period of history, and you can see those influences in the way they dress and the way they talk, like whether it was the Civil War or the 1930s or 1950s, and they just the way they, like, I think the kid, what's his name, Homer, he was turned in the 1950s. So a lot of the sort of idioms and the things that he uses and the expressions are like 1950s slang. So yeah. So it's just stuff like that didn't really get mentioned in the movie, but it's all there in the background. So it's all just kind of feeding into their backstory.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a cool movie. The ending's a little iffy, but
they got a little carried away.
They got a little silly at the end. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it ranks right up there.
Yeah.
But the Lost Boys always does get more mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Lost. It's a much more quotable movie. It's a lot more fun.
That's true. Yeah. Definitely.
And Kiefer Sutherland was very cool.
Yeah, they had a bunch of people in that movie. Trying to push it, and I think Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen were definitely, not getting the same star treatment.
And they just done Aliens. It was them and is it Jeanette Goldstein? I think the name is, who was Vasquez.
I don't remember.
She was, I think it's Jeanette. Sure, it's Jeanette Goldstein. I could look that up. She was Vasquez in Aliens. They'd all just finished filming Aliens,
but it hadn't come out yet.
It hadn't come out yet, and then
had it come out yet? Yeah, it was already out.
It might have
before.
Both
of those movies.
Yeah, they worked on Aliens, and then I think it was Lance Henriksen or Bill Paxton was signed on for the Near Dark, and then he called up the others and said,
"Come on and get in on it,"
because it was a small budget movie, and but yes, it was those three. I don't know if anybody else from that movie was in there, but there was one of the things that's got half the cast of Aliens in it.
Yeah.
But, One thing you can say about it.
Well, tell us a bit about the story that you've written for this book that we're working on.
It's called Magic Hour. I believe that's the title that we're going to use. It's about a family who they started out many like generations ago as a family of farmers, and they've kind of got this relationship with the local wildlife, because originally there was a colony of magpies. It revolves largely around magpies. There's a colony of magpies that lived in the trees near their farm, and they realized that the magpies would warn them when there was danger about. I mean, this is based on something that I read about. Apparently, there was an old tradition in France with shepherds would leave offerings in the trees nearby where they were grazing their flocks to attract the magpies and encourage the magpies to settle there, because whenever there was a potential predator around, like a fox or a wolf, the magpies would all start chattering the trees and getting excited, and that would warn the shepherd that there was danger nearby. Yeah. So I kind of took that idea and brought it into more of a mystical idea of, it almost becomes, after they've been doing this for so long, it almost becomes like a kind of a symbiotic thing between this family and the local magpies. And there's usually in every generation, there'll be like a member of the family who almost has like a spiritual sort of a link to them and can communicate with them. Yeah. And so that becomes like a tradition in the family, that the magpies always follow them around and they have this connection with them. And it's what happens when a werewolf finally makes it through the door and bites one of the family, and then that member of the family gets the sort of the werewolf infection or the curse or whatever you want to call it, and it's what happens from there. So it's about some other members of the family. They go out looking, even though they're not really werewolf hunters per se. They just kind of get some equipment together and go out and try to track down the werewolf that did this, because they're sort of trying to see if they can reverse the effect or fix the situation. Yeah. And it's all about how they track him down and what happens when they find him.
It's a very cool piece, and the way that you've woven the mysticism into it, and kind of drawn on the family history, and that the way that you move it forward, and it's a different look at this universe than anyone else has taken. It's really well done. It's a great story. So that's something for everyone to look forward to. It's really, really cool, and you did a great job with your own backstory for this. And again, the pacing is really done expertly, and you build it up nicely and pivot kind of back and forth between the mysticism and then the current day reaction to what's happened to the family, and it's good stuff. Very much excited for that to be a part of the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I was trying to remember. We did the first Legends of the Monster Hunter way back when. Did you do Dogpile or Till the Sun is in the Sky first?
Till the Sun is in the Sky was first.
Okay.
I think that was in the second Trigger Reflex book.
Uh-huh.
And then Dogpile was probably in the third one.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Dogpile was sort of that was sort of the origin of Coppertown Red, because then it was expanding the main character in Coppertown Red is one of the characters from Dogpile.
Right.
And the antagonist is also the same. So it was just taking that little story and expanding it out and seeing what happens next.
Yeah, just get the whole world.
Yeah, I left that story with a little bit of an open ending. Just kind of went into what would happen next and expand that into a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Dogpile was kind of, think of Dog Soldiers meet Smoking Aces.
Yeah.
So I had the idea of
good way of putting it.
People stuck in a farmhouse being attacked by werewolves, and then Smoking Aces was a whole lot of competing hitmen all going after the same target.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of combined those ideas, and there was a whole lot of people trying to track down the same werewolf, and they all run into each other in the same house.
Yeah.
And But it's werewolf hunters on one side and his old pack on the other side who are trying to get rid of him.
Yeah, it's a good
He's
story.
exiled. So yeah, and it's just what happens when those two crash into each other.
Okay. You got anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything else you're working on? Any other side projects?
Not presently. At the moment, it's just focusing on Coppertown Red and the species problem, and the next one after that. Yeah, so the first two are written and pretty much edited and ready to go, and then just working on the third one. So, which will be how it all comes together at the end. Third part of a trilogy is always the. I've never written a trilogy before, but I'm realizing that writing the third one is how do we wrap all this up? Because
sticking is always an interesting.
Yes, yeah. Because the first one was in one town, and then the second one it goes off into different locations and all different storylines, and then that's how you bring all that back together.
Right.
And
you can go
make the ending not suck, which is always seems to be the challenge with some trilogies I've seen.
Always the challenge for the third book. Do you have a name for it that you're working with or kicking around, or anything you want to tease with?
The third book we talking about?
Yep.
The title for that one is This Fragile Skin.
Okay.
I like and that. It's basically it's the idea of like I said, we're never quite sure how much the world knows about werewolves. Sort of there's the world with all the supernatural world with werewolves and vampires and everything, and then there's the ordinary human world, and it's the idea of the barrier between them and how much goes back and forth across that border. So it's the idea of the fragile skin that could be broken at any moment.
Yeah.
So that was where that title came from.
That's a great title. I like that. Very cool. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Let me know when you have that one ready.
Yep.
For sure. Okay. Thank you for joining.
No problem.
Joining me today, and it's night for me right now, but it's morning for you because you're in New Zealand.
Yeah, getting on to 11 o'clock now.
So it's always fun trying to find a time when everyone's schedule meets up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And we are coming up. It's about mid-September now, and we're looking for an October 31st release date for this book. So something we'll be releasing pretty soon, and getting more and more excited as the book is coming together. All right, man. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Okay. And
I'm talking to you.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.